They're strikers. On today, feature stories. Cases of true stories of real person. These true crime stories are so horrific, it's difficult to believe they actually happened, or that human beings could be capable of committing such atrocities. And yet, these stories are indeed all true. Sometimes, real life is a lot grimmer than fiction. Sometimes, real life involves murder, abduction, betrayal, torture, and death. This is the first part of the real stories of the Setagaya family. New Year's Eve is typically a joyous occasion. It's a sign of change, that the old is fading away for new. It's a time to celebrate a promising fresh start, generally with your family and closest friends. In Japan, this day is known as Omisoka, and it is widely regarded as one of the most important days of the year. There are customs and traditions involved, which most people follow. While in America, New Year's Eve is often seen as a time to party and kiss someone at midnight. In Japan, New Year's is treated as the most prestigious of holidays, but at the turn of this past century, an event occurred that forever marred the holiday season. It occurred in the district of Tokyo known as Setagaya, and for close to 2 decades. What happened on this night has continued to completely stump investigators. In Japan, the culture celebrates the end of a century differently than most. While in America, we welcomed the dawn of a new millennium with the infamous Y2K scare. Japan was celebrating the new century an entire year later, with the opening of 2001. Mikiya Miyazawa, the 44-year-old patriarch of the family, worked for Interbrand, a London-based marketing firm. It's unclear what kind of work Mikiya did for the business, but this was a large company with offices in over 20 countries, who had worked on large marketing campaigns for companies like Microsoft, Nissan, Xerox, and many others. Heck, the year before, in 1999, Interbrand was the company responsible for branding the term Wi-Fi. Fellow employees at Interbrand described Mikiya as congenial. They claimed that he was the kind of guy that got on well with everyone. Definitely not the sort of person to make enemies. Yasuko Miyazawa, the family's 41-year-old mother and wife, was very much the same, seen as kind and compassionate by everyone. She was a teacher that spent a lot of her time with the couple's 2 children, 8-year-old Nina and 6-year Rei. Nina, the daughter, was in the 2nd grade, and was by all accounts a typical little girl. She was playful. She was fun. She enjoyed soccer and ballet, both of which she was very active in. Rei, the youngest of the family, had been going through an issue lately. He had had a speech impairment, which had been causing the family a fair amount of stress. Apparently, they had started to seek out professional help for the matter, but it was still a real worry to them. Mikiya and Yusuke Miyazawa had moved into their Setagaya-based home in 1990. At the time, it had been a burgeoning development with over 200 families, and it seemed like a nice enough area to raise a family. Setagaya, one of Tokyo's 23 districts, the 2nd largest of them all, located just southwest of the main city. Just a short distance away from the Tokyo Bay, Setagaya is a very residential-looking area that stands out from its busy, cramped surroundings. The home was a shared building that was split into 2, so on the outside, it looked like one house, but was much closer to a duplex than anything. It allowed the Miyazawas to live right next door to Yasuko's family. Her mother, mostly, but also her sister and her brother-in-law, who lived with her. During this time period, this allowed a total of 7 family members to live in this shared domicile, although there was no internal connection between the 2 houses. To get from one side to the other, you need to go outside and enter through another door. The most impacting fact of the house, though, was the park right behind it. The park had been there for years now, but the city had been planning on expanding it. This meant that most of the Miyazawa's neighbors had been moving out in recent months in order to make way for this expansion. The community that had once contained over 200 families had now been narrowed just down to 4. The Miyazawas and their relatives living next door, and 2 other families that lived on their street. Besides that, it was a ghost town of a neighborhood. Most of the activity from the area was happening in the skate park right behind the Miyazawa family home. This was the busiest part of the ever-expanding park, but led to some issues for the Miyazawa clan. See, the skate park was located directly behind the house, separated only by a fence. In the week leading up to New Year's Eve, Mikiya had confronted a group of loud and obnoxious teenagers at the skate park for making too much of a racket. At around the same time, a witness reported seeing him confront a group of young rebels that belonged to the Bosozoku, a Japanese motorcycle gang of sorts due to the increased foot traffic of the park behind them, which the city was planning on expanding further. The Miyazawas were one of the last families to make plans on moving. It was December of 2000, and in just a few months, they would be moving to another house in the area. So all they needed to do was rough out the skate park hooligans for a few months, and then they wouldn't have to worry about it ever again. Unfortunately, they would never get the chance. The week before New Year's Eve would be known for some other unusual experiences for the Miyazawa family. Besides the encounters with hooligans that Mikia had to deal with, apparently in the summer months, the community had started to notice some of the area's animals being physically tormented. There are rumors that rodents had been found, having been killed, and even the local cats, mostly strays, had been tortured. One eyewitness recalls seeing a stray that they were friendly with suddenly appear without a tail one day. Unfortunately, the language barrier prevents me from investigating these rumors more closely, but I felt that they were noteworthy to add. On December 25th, Christmas Day, Yuzuko mentioned to her father-in-law that a strange car had been parking in front of their house. This has happened on not just one occasion, but several, despite the fact that there was other parking nearby, which wouldn't require the person parking to jump over a fence to get into the park. 2 days later, on the 27th, a man estimated to be in his 40s was seen walking around the Miyazawa family home by an eyewitness. A seemingly innocent thing, as the park nearby ensures that people would be in the area for a variety of reasons, but in retrospect looks suspicious. On December 29th, just days before the dawn of the new century, a man was spotted in the nearby Seijugakenmen station, which is just a few miles. On December 29th, just days before the dawn of the new century, a man was spotted in the nearby Seijugakenmen station, which is just a few miles away from where the Miyazawa family was living. This man was wearing a skater type of outfit, which an eyewitness recalled as being odd. Due to the weather, they thought that this man, who was wearing a backpack, looked very under-dressed. It was on this day, the 29th, that police believe a man matching this rough description purchased a sashimi knife from that same shopping area. It was the only one purchased at this supermarket on this day, so it was relatively easy to trace. On December 30th, a man matching the same description was spotted near Sengawa Station, roughly a mile away from where the Miyazawas lived. This unsub was stated to be in the age range of 35 to 40 years old, and appeared to be getting closer and closer to the Miyazawa family home in Setagaya, unbeknownst to them. Saturday, December 30th would be the last day for the entire Miyazawa family. They went about their daily business, preparing for the pending holiday. There was a festive cheer in the air, due to the upcoming new year, which brought with it the fresh start of a new century. Sometime in the early evening, at around 6 o'clock p.m., the family apparently went shopping. We can't be sure whether all 4 of the family members went, but an eyewitness recalled seeing them at a nearby shopping center at around that time. A neighbor who drove by their house that evening recalled seeing the family car missing at around 6:30 p.m., leading to this story's credence. At around 7 o'clock that night, Yuzuko called next door to her mother. The families often used the phone to speak to one another, viewing themselves as neighbors. The conversation itself was likely something mundane, and most possibly was Yuzuko asking her mother if she wanted to visit with her granddaughter. This is corroborated by Niana going next door to watch a recorded TV program until 9:30 p.m. or so. Up until this point in the night, everything was just relatively normal for the Miyazawa family. The last recorded activity we have of the Miyazawa family is an accessed email, which was read at around 10:38 that evening. It was Mikia reading a work email, which was password protected, meaning he was likely personally responsible for opening it. This was the last moment we know that at least one member of the Miyazawa family was alive, and their home, normally quiet and tranquil, was about to become a house of horrors. At around 10 o'clock that evening, a witness walking along the park path behind the Miyazawa house heard what sounded like an argument taking place inside of the house. They didn't recall any loud physical noises or any particularly earth-shattering screams, but they said it just sounded like a couple getting heated at one another. About an hour and a half later, a member of Yuzuko's family next door would hear a loud banging sound come from the Miyazawa side of the building. They weren't sure of the exact time, but were able to estimate it later on based on the schedule of television programming at the time. This was around the same time that an eyewitness Or perhaps a neighbor recalled seeing a man hurrying along the walking path that traveled next to the family's house. These were the only 3 signs that something was amiss that night in Setagaya. The terror that had been unleashed in the Miyazawa home wouldn't be discovered for hours. Within the close proximity of the Miyazawa house, a taxi driver was picking up 3 passengers. These 3 passengers, nameless, mistake on the cabbie, in retrospect, were all middle-aged men, all of whom remained quiet throughout their journey. The taxi driver recalled this as being very odd for the time. It was well past midnight at this point, and these 3 men were being dropped off at a nearby station not too far away. One of the men apparently had a wound on him, and left a blood stain on the back seat of the cab. The driver recalls this as being very odd, and I would have found it to be disgusting. So I can't blame him for remembering the details of that drive very succinctly. However, the driver would have no reason to panic until the details of what had happened that night became known throughout Tokyo. The next morning, on New Year's Eve, Yasuko's mother tried calling her daughter's family to make plans for later that afternoon. Surprisingly, her call wouldn't even go through, let alone ring. Unbeknownst to her, the phone lines in the Miyazawa family home had been cut, purposefully disconnected by someone hours beforehand. She traveled outside and walked over to the home containing her daughter, son-in-law, and 2 grandkids. She rang the doorbell, to no answer, and according to the police report she would file later, used her set of keys to let herself in. The house itself was silent, with no noise to make out. As Yasuko's mother entered the house, she would have undoubtedly known something was wrong, and she began to discover the truth in mere seconds. As she made her way into the family's house, only to be confronted by the body of Mikiya Miyazawa at the bottom of the staircase. The 44-year-old father of the family had been stabbed multiple times, and was lying lifeless at the bottom of the staircase leading up to the 2nd story. Yasuko's mother recalls going upstairs to the 2nd story, to try and see what had happened to the rest of her family. Immediately at the top of the stairs, she would find the bodies of her daughter, Yasuko, and her granddaughter, Nina, both of whom had been brutally stabbed dozens of times, far surpassing the level of anguish that Mikyo's body had received. Yasuko's mother recalls putting her hands on the bodies of her daughter and granddaughter, perhaps out of sorrow or maybe even hope, trying to see if there was a chance that either was still alive. Yasuko, her daughter, whom she had raised and been close with for over 40 years, and Nina, her granddaughter, whom she had been watching a television program with just 12 hours ago or so, both of whom were now cold and lifeless, loved ones transformed into corpses by an unknown killer ... in the nearby bedroom. Yasuko's mother would be confronted by the final tragedy. 6-year-old Rei, who had been battling through a speech impediment in an effort to please his parents, who was still in bed. He had been strangled to death, leading investigators to think that he had been the first member of the family killed. Needless to say, Yasuko's mother, this now traumatized grandmother, would contact the police, but the things she had seen could never be unseen, and nothing would bring back the family she had just lost. And that's for our first part of these stories. Until next time, watch out for the 2nd part, and this our feature real-life stories. Strikers, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.